Stay quiet.
The truck had no plates. That was the detail Gideon Virelli's mind locked onto, not the sound of steel folding like paper, not the sharp stench of burning rubber clawing up his windpipe, not the way his ribs compressed against the door panel hard enough to splinter. The truck had no plates. And in the split second before the armored SUV rolled, that fact landed in his chest like a stone dropped into still water. The impact came at 5:34 a.m. on the 101 North ramp toward the private terminal. The truck clipped them at a precise angle, driver's side, rear quarter, with enough force to flip a vehicle weighing over 4 tons. The SUV rotated once, hard, and slammed against the concrete barrier on its side. The windows blew. The city lights fractured into spinning fragments. And then everything went quiet except for the high, relentless ringing in Gideon's ears. He turned toward the front seat. His driver, Darius Wren, 22 years of early mornings, coffee orders, and quiet classical music, sat completely still. His head rested at an angle that required no medical training to interpret. No pulse check needed. No second look. Darius was gone. And the grief of that hit Gideon somewhere beneath the adrenaline, beneath the pain, somewhere deep and raw and wordless. Gideon pulled himself through the shattered rear window. He stood on the cold asphalt in the gray San Francisco fog, blood sliding down from a cut above his left ear, and he made a choice that would define the next 72 hours of his life. He did not call 911. He did not call his head of security. He stood there, breathing through cracked ribs, and chose silence. Before we go any further, if you woke up this morning, survived a crash that was meant to kill you, and your most trusted driver just lost his life, what would your very next move be? Drop it in the comments. Because what Gideon did next is something most people would never consider. Welcome to King's Vault channel, where we cook and serve you beautiful stories. Where are you watching from? I believe some of you are tuning in from the US, UK, Canada, Australia, Jamaica, or South Africa. I would like to know where you are tuning in from in the comment section, as I love to connect with you all. Stay with me as we continue. Because here is the thing about Gideon Virelli, he didn't survive 20 years in the sharpest corners of Silicon Valley by reacting. He survived by thinking. And right now, one thought cut through everything else like a razor. Only 3 executives knew about the Zurich meeting. Only 3 people on this earth knew which terminal, which morning, which route. And one of them had just tried to erase him. He came through the back entrance of his Hillsborough estate at 9:47 a.m., on foot, through the landscaping gate that even his personal chef didn't know existed. Gideon's mansion sat above the fog line like something designed to intimidate the sky. Steel beams and floor-to-ceiling glass. Clean lines. No warmth. From the outside it looked less like a home and more like a statement, the kind of structure that told the world its owner had already won. Security cameras swept the perimeter in timed rotations. Motion sensors lined the garden path. The front entrance required a biometric scan, a PIN, and a voice confirmation. But Gideon bypassed all of it. He moved through the landscaping corridor, slipped into the lower-level access point, and came out into the underground garage. He needed air. He needed 4 walls and no one watching. He needed to think without a single phone call, a single assistant, a single corporate voice telling him what to say to the board. The garage was immaculate, LED lit, climate-controlled, the kind of space that cost more to maintain than most people's mortgages. Along the far wall sat the 1961 Bentley S2 Continental. Deep burgundy. Chrome trim polished to a mirror finish. His grandfather had found it rusting in a New Jersey lot and spent 11 years restoring it by hand. It was the only thing in Gideon's life that no one else had touched. He stopped walking. The lights were already on. The garage ran on a motion activation system. If no one had been down here, those lights should have been off. Gideon stood in the doorway. The air was too still. No sound of ventilation cycling. No hum of equipment running. Just silence pressed flat against every surface. He scanned the space slowly. And then he saw her. Kneeling beside the Bentley, her hands partially beneath the chassis, was Nyah Okafor, his live-in housekeeper. She hadn't heard him come in. Her back was turned, her head down, and her right hand was moving with careful, deliberate slowness along the underside of the vehicle. Every instinct Gideon had left screamed one word. Why? He took one step forward and Nyah's head snapped up. For a half-second, the two of them locked eyes across 20 feet of polished concrete, and what Gideon saw on her face was not guilt. It wasn't the wide-eyed scramble of someone caught doing something wrong. It was something different. Something urgent. Something that looked almost like relief that it was him and not someone else walking through that door. She rose slowly. Carefully. Her movements were measured the way someone moves when the floor beneath them might not hold. Mr. Virelli. Her voice dropped to just above a whisper. Stay calm. Gideon's jaw tightened. His ribs were still grinding with every breath. There was dried blood on his collar and glass fragments caught in his jacket sleeve. He had just watched his driver die on a highway ramp 4 hours ago, and now his housekeeper was kneeling under his grandfather's car telling him to stay calm. What are you doing? His voice came out low and hard. Nyah took one slow step toward him, both hands raised slightly, palms open. If you raise your voice or move too fast toward the vehicle, the motion sensor will trigger it. The garage went absolutely silent. Gideon's next breath didn't come for 3 full seconds. Trigger what? He said. She held his gaze without blinking. There is a device wired to the undercarriage of the Bentley. Compact. Military-grade construction. It's motion activated and it is live right now. The word landed like a weight drop from a height. Live. His mind ran the math instantly. The Bentley was scheduled to transport him to the Westbrook Foundation charity gala that evening. 6 hours away. One of the most photographed events on the Bay Area social calendar. Cameras everywhere. Hundreds of guests. Maximum visibility. Maximum impact. Gideon forced his breathing to slow. How did you find it? Nyah's hands were trembling slightly, not from fear of him, but from the effort of holding herself together. I came down this morning to polish the car for the gala. I noticed a foreign attachment near the rear axle. The wiring pattern, I recognized it from a trauma response workshop I attended years ago. Off-grid detonation trigger. You recognized a bomb trigger from a workshop. Yes. Why didn't you call the police? Nyah paused. Just briefly. But in that pause lived an answer that was about to break everything open. Because the security system in this house reports directly to Mr. Hallstrom. The name hit Gideon like a second collision. Dorian Hallstrom. Chief Operating Officer of Black Halo Systems. The man business journalists called the shadow architect of the company's meteoric rise. The man who had sat across from Gideon at the founding table, who had co-written the company's core framework, who knew every financial clause, every board agreement, every succession protocol buried in the operating charter. The man who had pushed hardest, almost aggressively, for the Zurich acquisition. And the man who, per the terms of the emergency succession clause buried in Black Halo's restructured operating agreement, would assume interim executive control if Gideon became incapacitated or died during an active international business operation. Gideon's throat tightened. He stood very still in the center of that garage, his mind moving fast, pulling threads. Dorian had personally insisted Gideon take the armored SUV to the terminal that morning, not the sedan, not the private shuttle. The SUV. He had cited elevated digital threats and escalating corporate intelligence concerns. He had also, Gideon now recalled, asked the driver to confirm the route the evening prior. Dorian had altered that route. At 4:58 a.m., just 14 minutes before departure, a route adjustment had been pushed to the SUV's navigation system. Gideon hadn't thought twice about it. Dorian managed logistics. That was normal. But nothing about this morning was normal. Gideon felt rage building somewhere beneath his sternum, clean, focused, the kind that doesn't shout. He turned it over in his mind once, twice. He looked at Nyah standing 6 feet away, her hands still slightly raised, her expression carefully steady. For one sharp moment, suspicion flared. What if this was misdirection? What if she was pointing him toward Dorian to protect someone else? What if she was part of it? He almost said it out loud. The accusation was right there, ready to leave his mouth. But then he looked at her hands. She hadn't run. She hadn't called anyone. She had stayed in this garage, alone, next to a live explosive device, and waited. For him. A man who paid her to clean his house and fold his linen. He pushed the accusation back down. Gideon exhaled slowly. You said there was more. Nyah nodded once. There is. And the countdown ticking in the background grew louder. 5 hours until the gala. Nyah spoke in a low, controlled voice, the way someone speaks when they know the walls might be listening. She told him about the cameras. The Hillsborough estate had 18 security cameras across the main structure and 4 additional units inside the garage itself. Standard setup. Gideon had approved the installation 2 years prior as part of a broader security upgrade. What he did not know, what Nyah had discovered 3 weeks ago while cleaning the server room adjoining the garage, was that 2 of those 4 interior garage cameras had been quietly rerouted. Not disabled. Rerouted. Their feeds no longer ran to the mansion's central security hub. They ran somewhere else. Meaning someone outside this house could be watching this garage right now. Gideon went completely still. He did not look up at the cameras. He trained himself not to. But his neck went cold. When did you find this? He said, barely moving his lips. 22 days ago, Nyah answered. I didn't know what it meant then. I thought it was a maintenance error. But now I know it wasn't. She also told him about the secondary trigger. She had examined the device carefully enough that her hand still showed faint grease marks she hadn't been able to fully wipe away. The explosive wasn't just motion activated from beneath the vehicle. It was wired to a secondary signal, a remote ping that could also trigger detonation independently of any physical movement. Which meant even if they kept the Bentley perfectly still, someone with a remote device and a signal could end this garage, this car, and everyone inside it from anywhere within range. Calling emergency services through the mansion's internal communication system would broadcast a location signal through the same network the secondary trigger was linked to. The device had been built for exactly this scenario. Someone had anticipated a discovery. Someone had closed every exit. Gideon's smartwatch buzzed against his wrist. He looked down without thinking. A message from Dorian. 3 words. Still on schedule. Sweat moved down the back of Gideon's neck. He powered the watch off, dead, no signal, exactly as Nyah had been about to tell him to. She nodded when he did it. The device is still live, she said quietly. And we have less than 5 hours before people start arriving at this address for the gala. The phone in Gideon's jacket pocket began to vibrate. He didn't answer it. Because right at that moment, Nyah's eyes shifted, just slightly, to the garage entry door behind him. Someone was requesting access from outside. The access panel beside the garage entry door beeped once, a single, clean tone, and then went silent. Gideon did not move. Nyah did not move. The 2 of them stood in the center of that LED-lit space like 2 people who had just realized the room they were standing in had no safe exit. The panel beeped again. Whoever was on the other side was using a valid access code. Not forcing entry. Not tripping an alarm. Using a code that had been issued by someone with authorization. Gideon's security chief, Brennan Osei, had a code. Dorian Hallstrom had a code. The panel beeped a 3rd time, and then the request timed out. Silence flooded back in. Neither of them exhaled for a full 4 seconds. Nyah turned to Gideon and held up one finger, wait, then moved with deliberate slowness toward the garage's manual junction panel mounted on the east wall. Her sneakers made no sound on the polished floor. She opened the panel's cover with 2 fingers and located the circuit that controlled the interior camera feeds. She did not cut the cameras. She rerouted them back, manually, using a bypass switch she had clearly identified during those 22 days of quiet observation, sending both compromised feeds into a loop of archived footage from the previous evening. Whoever was watching the garage on a remote screen was now watching empty footage from 9 hours ago. Gideon watched her work and felt something shift inside him. Not trust exactly, trust takes time. But recognition. The kind that comes when you realize the person standing next to you has been thinking 3 moves ahead while you were still processing the first one. 4 hours remained before the first gala guests arrived at the front gate. Nyah returned to the Bentley and crouched beside the rear axle. She reached into the canvas bag she had set beside the wheel and removed a padded hydraulic jack, the compact kind used in precision restoration work. She positioned it beneath the suspension arm with surgical patience, cranking it in increments so small that the car's chassis barely registered a shift. Her goal was to remove all potential vibration load from the section of frame where the device was wired. Gideon crouched beside her, his ribs screaming with the movement. He watched her hands. Steady. Practiced. The hands of someone who had spent years learning to work carefully in high-pressure situations, emergency wards, crisis rooms, places where one wrong move ends something. How long will this hold it stable? He asked. Long enough, she said. If we don't move the car. His phone vibrated again in his pocket. He didn't look at it. Then the garage's external intercom crackled to life. A voice came through, clipped, professional, familiar. It was Brennan Osei, his security chief. Mr. Virelli, I'm getting an anomaly reading on the garage sensor grid. Requesting visual confirmation. Please respond. Gideon looked at Nyah. Nyah looked at Gideon. The remote ping on the secondary trigger, the one wired to the estate's communication network, meant that the moment Gideon responded through any internal system, it could activate. Brennan's voice came through again, slightly harder this time. Sir. I need you to respond. I'm coming in. The federal agents arrived at Dorian Haustrom's Pacific Heights townhouse at 6:14 p.m., 47 minutes before the gala's first toast. Dorian answered the door in a charcoal dinner jacket, a glass of sparkling water in his hand, and a calm so rehearsed it could have been framed and sold. He looked at the two lead investigators, Special Agent Cordell Ashby and his partner, Agent Renata Fuqua, and smiled the way powerful men smile when they believe they are the smartest person in any room they enter. Gentlemen, he said. Then, noticing Fuqua, my apologies. And lady. Neither agent smiled back. They walked him through his own foyer and sat him at his own dining table, and Agent Ashby set a tablet face down in front of him without a word. The silence in that room was a different kind of silence than the garage had been. The garage was the silence of danger. This was the silence of consequence. Dorian maintained his composure through the first 10 minutes of questioning. Yes, he was aware of the Zurich meeting. Yes, he had suggested the armored vehicle. Yes, he had adjusted the route, for security reasons, he said. Standard precaution. His tone never wavered. His eye contact was direct. He had answers ready the way someone has answers ready when they have practiced them. Then Agent Fuqua turned the tablet over. It showed timestamp verified airport surveillance footage from San Francisco International's restricted cargo access corridor, captured at 4:11 a.m., 90 minutes before the crash. The footage showed a man in a logistics vest moving through a corridor that required both a magnetic access badge and a biometric clearance. The man's face was turned slightly from the camera. But the badge he used, the one that opened that door, was registered to a contractor account created 11 months prior under a shell vendor name. A shell vendor that had been incorporated using a business address registered to a private holding company. A holding company that traced back, through two intermediary LLCs, to Dorian Haustrom. The smile didn't leave Dorian's face all at once. It dissolved in stages, first the corners of his mouth, then his eyes, then the practiced ease in his shoulders, until what remained at that table was not a confident executive but a man watching the architecture of a plan he had spent months building come apart in real time. He wasn't alone. That much became clear within the hour. Agent Ashby laid out a second document. Financial wire transfers. Timed, structured, deliberate. Moving from a private equity consortium into a holding account designed to activate upon a specific triggering event, the unplanned death of a sitting CEO during international travel. The funds had been staged to execute a discounted acquisition of Black Halo Systems within 72 hours of that event. Two members of Black Halo's own board of directors had co-authorized those transfers. Trayvon Whitfield. Board seat, 6 years. And Cassandra Drummond Pierce, the company's longest-serving independent director, the woman who had delivered the keynote at Gideon's last shareholder conference and spoken for 11 minutes about integrity in leadership. Both of them. The room felt like it lost oxygen. Dorian asked for his attorney. He said nothing further. But as Agent Fuqua led him from the table, he turned back once, and for just a fraction of a second, something crossed his face that wasn't fear and wasn't anger. It was the look of a man who had genuinely believed this would work. Who had planned for every scenario. Every variable. Except one. He hadn't planned for Nyah Okafor. By 8:30 p.m., Gideon was in a secure conference room on the 31st floor of Black Halo's San Francisco headquarters, his ribs wrapped in medical tape, a fresh shirt borrowed from his assistant, and the weight of the last 16 hours sitting on his face like something carved there. Across the table from him sat 4 people. His general counsel, Portia Slade-Reeves. 2 federal liaisons. And the company's lead forensic accountant, a quiet, precise man named Aldrich Mensa who had been quietly auditing Black Halo's secondary financial structures for the past 72 hours on Portia's authorization. Aldrich set a bound report on the table and opened it to a flagged page without preamble. The insurance clause wasn't new. That was the detail that hit hardest. The clause buried in Black Halo's restructured operating agreement, the one that transferred interim executive control and unlocked a board-level acquisition vote in the event of the CEO's death during active international operations, had been inserted 18 months ago. It had been written into the agreement during a governance review that Dorian had led personally. The board had approved it as a routine update. Nobody had flagged it. Nobody had pushed back. Because on paper, it looked like a standard continuity provision. But paired with the private equity consortium waiting in position, with the insurance policy on Gideon's life that named the company, not his family, as primary beneficiary, and with the succession vote that would have transferred majority board authority to Whitfield and Drummond Pierce within 48 hours of Gideon's death, it wasn't continuity. It was a blueprint. A corporate coup constructed over 18 months, embedded inside legal language, disguised as governance. The kind of scheme that, if it had worked, would have looked on every public filing like the sad, unfortunate consequence of a tragic accident. Gideon sat very still through Aldrich's presentation. Portia watched him. She had known him for 11 years and had never once seen him cry. She didn't see it now either. But she saw something in his eyes that she later described to her husband as the look of a man who had just understood the full cost of being powerful, not the rewards, not the reach, but the cost. He had built something worth taking. And he had trusted the wrong architects. He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. San Francisco stretched below him, light scattered across the dark like something broken and beautiful. His reflection looked back at him, pale, tired, ribs taped under a borrowed shirt. Then he turned around. "I want every executive communication from the last 24 months pulled," he said. His voice was steady. Quiet. The kind of quiet that means a decision has already been made. Every internal message, every flagged contractor account, every vendor authorization Dorian touched. "I want Aldrich's team cross-referencing all of it by morning." Portia nodded. "There's one more thing," she said carefully. Aldrich turned to another flagged page in the report. The forensic review had surfaced something else. Something that had nothing to do with Black Halo. A search pattern, tied to one of the IP addresses linked to Dorian's private network, had pulled archived records from a corporate collapse that happened 5 years prior. A mid-size logistics technology firm based in Austin, Texas. The CEO of that company had died in what was ruled an accidental vehicle failure during a solo drive on a mountain road outside the city. No foul play was ever established. The company had been acquired at a steep discount within 60 days of his death. Dorian Hallstrom had been a senior strategic advisor on that company's board. The room went completely silent. Portia looked at Gideon. "Federal investigators are already being briefed," she said. "They're pulling the original case file." Gideon said nothing. He looked at the report, at the name of the man who had died on that mountain road, a man named Roxton Caldwell, 41 years old, father of 2, who had reportedly been driving to a board retreat, and he stayed with that for a long moment. Because Roxton Caldwell had known Nyah Okafor. Nobody had been paying attention. The press conference was held 11 days later, in the main atrium of Black Halo Systems headquarters. Cameras filled every available angle. Reporters from 17 outlets lined the front rows. Financial journalists. Tech correspondents. 3 national television networks had sent live crews. The arrest of Dorian Hallstrom and the subsequent charges against Whitfield and Drummond Pierce had sent the kind of shockwave through the business world that people were still feeling in their bones, the kind that makes investors reassess everything they thought they understood about who was running the companies they trusted. Gideon walked to the podium with his ribs still wrapped beneath his suit. He set no notes in front of him. He looked at the room for one full second before he spoke, and in that second the cameras caught something on his face that every anchor would replay and describe differently. some called it resolve, some called it grief, one called it the expression of a man who had survived something he was still trying to understand. Then he shifted the microphone slightly and said one name. Nyah Okafor. He didn't describe her as his housekeeper. He didn't use her job title. He said her name the way you say the name of someone who pulled you out of something you couldn't get out of alone. He told the room, without embellishment, what she had done. How she had found the device. How she had stabilized it. How she had rerouted the cameras, kept her composure, and guided him away from a detonation trigger while her own hands were trembling. How she had stayed in that garage alone, next to a live explosive, because she had made a judgment call that the internal security system could not be trusted, and she had been right. The atrium was absolutely still. Gideon then announced that Black Halo Systems would be fully funding Nyah's return to Howard University's nursing program, with a completed medical school scholarship attached upon graduation. He announced a new internal division, the Okafor Oversight Initiative, a cross-functional whistleblower protection and independent security review program that would operate outside the authority of any single executive officer. He also announced the restructuring of every board-level succession clause in the company's operating agreement, to be reviewed by an independent governance panel with zero ties to current leadership. He paused. Then he said something that the financial press did not know how to categorize. I almost accused her, he said, his voice dropping lower. Before she finished explaining what she'd found, I almost said it out loud. That she was involved. That she had something to do with it. He looked down briefly. I want to say that publicly, because that is what fear does. It targets whoever is closest. And if I had let that fear speak before she did, I would not be standing here. Someone in the room started crying. The cameras caught it. Nobody could identify who. Nyah sat in the third row, in a navy blazer she had bought 2 days earlier. She did not stand when Gideon said her name. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her chin level and her eyes forward, steady as she had been in that garage, steady as she had been her entire life, a woman who had learned long ago that the world does not always announce when it is testing you. But then federal investigator Cordell Ashby stepped to a secondary podium on the left side of the stage. And the room's attention shifted. Because Agent Ashby had an announcement of his own. Encrypted files recovered from Dorian Hallstrom's private network had revealed something the original investigation had not anticipated. The encrypted files contained 11 folders. Each folder was labeled with a year. The earliest was dated 8 years ago. The most recent was dated 4 months before the morning of the crash. Inside each folder were strategic documents, acquisition models, succession timelines, financial staging plans, tied to different companies, different executives, different markets. Some of the companies in those files were still operating. Some had collapsed. And one of them, the folder dated 5 years back, contained detailed internal communications referencing a logistics technology firm in Austin, Texas, and a man named Roxton Caldwell. The communications showed pre-coordinated positioning. Insurance staging. A restructuring plan dated 6 weeks before Roxton Caldwell drove out of Austin on a mountain road and never came back. Federal authorities announced that morning that the original case file on Roxton Caldwell's death had been formally reopened. Gideon stood at the edge of the stage and listened to Agent Ashby read the announcement, and he did something that no camera fully caught. He closed his eyes for 3 seconds. 3 seconds for a man he had never met but whose story now ran parallel to his own like a track that had almost ended the same way. The difference was 11 days, a charity gala, and one woman who crouched beside a vintage car at the wrong time and chose not to look away. In the days that followed, Nyah Okafor gave one interview. A single one, to a small independent journalist who had been covering corporate accountability for 6 years from a newsletter most people in Silicon Valley had never heard of. In that interview, she was asked what made her stay in the garage instead of running. Instead of calling the police from outside the house and letting them handle it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I thought about running. For about 30 seconds, I thought about it. But I knew that if I left without stabilizing it, and someone came into that garage before I could explain, a staff member, a delivery driver, anyone, that would be on me. I couldn't carry that. She paused again. And I knew he was coming back. I didn't know why. I just knew. So I stayed. That answer circulated for weeks across every platform that covers stories about human beings doing extraordinary things in ordinary moments. Because that is what this story is, at its core. Not a story about a billionaire who survived a corporate conspiracy, though he did. Not a story about greed so organized it wore a board seat and a dinner jacket, though that is also true. This is a story about what it costs to be powerful and what it costs to be overlooked. About how the person who saves your life will rarely be the one whose name is on the building. About how courage sometimes looks like staying very still in a cold garage and whispering 2 words to a man who almost didn't deserve them. Stay calm. Roxton Caldwell had no one whispering in his direction. And investigators believe he was not the first. The reopened case has already surfaced 2 additional names, executives from separate industries, separate states, separate years, whose deaths occurred within proximity of companies Dorian Hallstrom had consulted for or held equity positions in. Both ruled accidental. Both under fresh review. When billionaires fall, this story told you, it is rarely by accident. Sometimes the plan was written before they ever left the house. And sometimes, the only thing standing between a man and the end of his story is a woman with grease on her hands and no reason to stay except that she decided it was the right thing to do. The garage light in the Hillsborough mansion still comes on automatically when someone walks in. Gideon has never changed that setting. He says it reminds him to pay attention to who else is in the room. If this story moved you, if you felt every twist, every moment of suspense, every breath held in that garage, then this channel is exactly where you belong. Subscribe to King's Vault right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss beautiful stories like this. Because the next one coming to this channel is just as real, just as raw, and just as impossible to stop watching once it starts. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Nyah's position? Would you have stayed? Let us know. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Your comment might be the one that inspires someone else to choose courage over silence. We will see you in the next one.